Okay. Let's let the chair, for the sake of recordation, restart. We are beginning our agenda audit committee for October the 7th. We have full attendance of all committee members present here in the Board of Supervisors courtroom. With that, I will ask you again to either present a motion to approve the agenda or to amend it.
I move approval of the agenda.
Okay, it's been properly moved. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. And it is carried. We'll move now to item 3, our invocation. And Dr. Ball, would you lead us in invocation today? You can do so from your seat.
Heavenly Father, how privileged we are to gather here today as your subjects to do your will. We ask that you would provide us wisdom, compassion, insight, and the knowledge we need necessary to perform our duties. And as we work here in beautiful Isle of Wight, we certainly think of those here in the East Coast of North Carolina, Tennessee, and those now in Florida, that your mercies would be with them, that we would know our best way how to help them in their situations. And we just ask that you would watch over all of us and bless our time and our conversations. So we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Let's stand together for our pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Chair, we can check from the state and see what it said. 69?
Yeah.
It's not 69.
It's not cold enough unless all the women have sweaters on.
I feel pretty good.
As we open our meeting today, I want to thank you all for serving in this capacity. I believe that as we take this journey together, we'll uncover a lot of information and details, not only for this committee, but also for our citizens. So thank you ahead of time. I may have said it at our formation meeting, but thank you ahead of time for your time and all the effort that will be put into this that provides another layer of covering and accountability for our county on behalf of our citizens. So thank you so much. We'll move now to item 6, presentation by staff regarding the annual comprehensive financial report. Mr. Keaton.
So, Wells has provided a booklet for you that each of you have at your desk. And she's going to walk through this. I just wanted to, we keep referring to this as the audit committee, but we don't call it the audit anymore. It's called the ACFR, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. So you'll hear that term used, the ACFR. It used to be called CAFR, and it changed to ACFR. I think it's still an auditing process, but we call this our financial report, just so we don't get confused with the different names of things. So Stephanie's going to walk through and talk about our financial policies. I got very detailed information about what the county's policies are, what fund accounting is. I mean, I know it may sound sort of basic to some of you, but for those who have been in the business world, maybe have not been in governmental accounting, it is quite different. Also talk about any audit findings or recommendations from this past year's audit, and then the FY24 status, where we are right now. Of course, we're deep in the middle of that. And then last thing on this, I'm going to tell you this right up front. So the question that came up last month is about the amount of tax revenue the county generates per 1 cent of taxes. It's $670,000. So just to give you an idea of how much 1 penny generates. And that has gone up quite a bit over the last few years as we got more growth and development of the county. And then I think the last thing Chairman wanted was to just talk about next steps, expectations, and maybe a future report from the treasurer.
Yes, sir.
Chairman Acree, I have a question. Acree, gosh. McCarty.
Strike that. No,
Yeah,
you're fine.
Chairman McCarty. So I have received some citizen feedback just that, and I've seen it online too, that is audit committee, I mean, some people were kind of confused about that. Are you okay with us explaining what it is as our charge for this committee, and then remaining with calling it the audit committee? I think you had said that we were naming it the audit committee because there's a precedent set in other counties in Virginia, other localities who also have audit committees. But I just didn't know if there was, I couldn't remember if last time we had a discussion about what we were going to call ourselves.
Well, I think the terms are interchangeable. I just want to say that you'll see this other term. That's why I just want to clarify what the other term was. So that was.
Right, so I bring it up though because I've had citizen comment about, oh, you have an audit committee, shouldn't you pay for an external audit? Shouldn't the county do better and do more than that instead of just calling us the audit committee? Some people, wrongly, again, assume that this group will be auditing the county financials and operating budget, which we are not.
That's correct. This committee will be providing oversight to the auditors, to the audit reports, as well as oversight of any reports and financial findings from other departments that make up the total fiscal well-being of Isle of Wight County. This committee is not the auditors. We have a separate company that we rightfully pay, and I believe we pay them quite handsomely to do their job. This committee is a level of oversight so that we can inform citizens and make sure that some of the details that are found in the audit that we do pay for are corrected, and that those things are followed up with in a proper sense so that, once again, everyone's informed.
Thank you.
Sir,
Is there a question? Yes, sir.
I was under the understanding that in addition to just being, which is what the outside auditor does is an accounting auditor. It is a check on, are we following and administering the finances of the county according to, what's the standard for government?
So it's Governmental Accounting Standards Board, yes,
Yes.
and they are that and GAAP as well. But they are not making an opinion about whether or not we're making good financial decisions. They are determining whether or not what we put in this document is accurate, and if they find anything materially wrong internally that could make this not represent what it should represent.
And that the intent of this audit committee was to go a step beyond that and look at policy and procedure or other operational activities that may improve or need to be improved as an outcome of the audit.
Yes, that's all attached to it. So kind of our first, in my opinion, the first layer is understanding the audit process, the different pieces that are put with the audit. And then out of that, because there's a lot of information just alone in the operation budget, let alone what's going to be presented here today. So everything's going to stem from that. I think we will, as stated by the Board of Supervisors in the adoption of this committee, that we will move into best practices and evaluation of various levels of spending and things like that. That those things will come along as has happened in every other locality or municipality that's had the similar committee. So, point well taken. Mr. Keaton, do you want to continue?
Yeah, so I think Ms. Wells can walk you through this document, and that'll prompt a lot of discussion as she goes through this, but at least this will give you a reference book for all the future activities I think this committee goes through as well.
Very good.
All that discussion is really good segue into what I've brought for you all today, because I'm not going to go through the annual financial report numbers. I'm going to go over this list of items that were provided for us to review, and this is more, I'm going to tell you what's in place, and then at a later date we could always revisit and change whatever we want to change. So starting off, the very first tab here is I started a budget and finance reporting schedule because I didn't have enough time to go through and put every exact date and every exact report due. This is just what I could remember off the top of my head in about 2 hours time. This may be a living document, this first page, but it should give us a starting point that we can add to, especially things under treasury, things under budgetary that we'll go over later. But today we're looking more at the financial reports and financial documents. So that's there for you to peruse at a later date. And then if you go to the next tab, this is something that I found online early on when I started working for the county, and I find it to be a really good reference manual. It shortens the statutes that we have that the county has to go by for due dates, for approving budgets. There's even pieces in here that have to do with approving school budgets and different things of that nature. So this might be something that you could use to familiarize yourself with why we approve our budgets by June 30th. Why we have to have a school board budget passed by May 15th. That all of that is in here. And then it talks a little bit also on page 11, if you flip over, it talks about an accounting system, bookkeeping for local offices. Just keep flipping through there. And then later it talks about budget officers and who's the budget officer with the county. It talks about budget controls. Just kind of keeping going. Centralized competitive purchasing by Chief Administrative Officer. The statutes say that in our form of government that Mr. Keaton is the procurement officer, but he has designated that to a procurement agent with the county. That's under my role, and so right now, because we don't have one, I'm fulfilling that role. So just putting that out there, that is a piece of what we do and how the statutes are written about that piece of it, because I will talk about purchasing policy a little bit. Just kind of moving on a little bit, flipping through, talks about audits starting on page 24. Something that obviously we are concerned with. It talks about when is the audit contract has to be done by April 1st of each year. Just different things of that nature. So you can, like I said, there's lots of information here. On page 26, it talks about treasurers in the budget. And so there is some duties there that talks about the treasurer's role and when they make payments and things of that nature. And then oversight, and I haven't read this piece in a while, so I don't remember what this section pertains to, but we could certainly review that. That is not our document, so making flags, you need a minute so you can get into your flags, Mr. Grace.
I'm trying to figure out how to open this.
A little piece
Got a
of
little
tape
sticky
on
on
the top.
Piece of tape.
So while you guys are doing, one of the things that stuck out to me on page 1 is the opening statement of the documents you provided. Virginia local governments have complex financial structures. That's a very simple way of pointing out a very robust truth. It is very complex to understand all the tentacles.
So that is not written by the county. That was something that was put together by Robinson
Right,
Farmer
yeah.
Cox back in 2010, but nothing has changed that I'm aware of in relation to financial controls in the state statutes. So the next section, the green section, it shows policy manual, but this is only an abbreviated version of our policy manual. I left the table of contents in there just because if you flip over to the first chapter 2, it's like the third page. This is our financial and accounting section. It says 151. It's like the third page after the green tab. So the first part is the central purchasing, and it talks about the procurement authority. There's lots of rules in here that the county sticks to when it comes to requests for proposals, IFEs, everything the county does to purchase. There's a Virginia Public Procurement Act that the county has to comply with, and so a lot of that is in this section. And as you keep flipping through, it's basically a guidebook for county procurement and the laws that we have to stick to. It talks about competitive bidding. Just keep flipping through. If you flip through to page 186, it says 186 at the bottom. This starts talking about our P-card policy. I'm not sure if you all know that we have a P-card. through Bank of America, and for the most part, our purchasing department is the administrator for the P-card program, but that's also through my office. But we do have a policy for purchasing card. Keep flipping through a little bit, page 195. This is important for our board because it talks about the capital improvement plan development process. And everything in the capital improvement plan has to start 50,000 and up. That's what is written in our policy right now. So if you wonder, where does our policy start and why we have a policy on the capital improvement process and what's in that document.
Single item or occurrence, is that correct?
Or project, yeah. It talks a little bit about useful life there, but we also don't confuse that with our useful life accounting process. That's a little bit different. But the next page, nonprofit funding requests. We also have a policy for that. I'm not sure if the board knew that there was an actual policy in our policy manual for that. I did want to mention something I didn't see in this policy is that the organization that we support cannot be church ran. So I don't know if we've ever even looked at that. Bobby, do you know? Our nonprofit funding requests, we can't provide funding to any church ran agencies. I don't know. I noticed it wasn't in the policy when I was reading through it. And then financial policies is on page 198. And there's quite a bit in here. Revenue diversification, fees and charges. If you go over to page 200, it starts talking about a balanced budget. Fund balance levels, that's something that we comply with, and we also report to the board in our annual budget. It talks again about capital improvement planning, and then debt is also a policy that we have to comply with. Our percentages start on page 202 at the bottom. One policy we have is the 4% debt as a percentage of assessed value, and then the next page, 12% debt as a percentage of general government expenditures. Then there's lots more information about our debt policy. Some of that is also.
We stop at those numbers because I just want to give you all information about how that works. So, for example, our assessed valuation this year was estimated.
And we are required by law to give you these numbers with the annual budget request, just so you point that out. Go ahead.
Yeah, so our total valuation of the county is estimated at almost $7 billion. So 4% of that number is the maximum that the county has as debt as a percentage of our assessed valuation. I think we're in the 2% range.
It should be right there on that page.
I think I pulled the budget out.
Yeah, it should be in the budget. So if you go to the debt detail section, starts on page 78 to 79. So for FY25, the percentage is 2.5%.
Okay. I know there was concern when the board talked about this a few years ago because there was concern that the county had too much debt for its size. And I think we went over that extensively 2 or 3 years ago, I believe, when we were going to issue the debt for
Hardy.
Hardy Elementary.
That's
School.
right.
And so that, just to give you an idea, just wanted to point that out. And that's set by the county. The county sets that percentage.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably some best practices, but that's a number that's set by the county.
And that was 6.7 billion?
6.7 billion would it be, yeah.
Of assessed
That's
value.
it's our assessed values.
Where'd you get that number?
From the budget.
Yeah,
At the very beginning, it was 6,685,000,000.
Page says something different. So I'm wondering which number.
That was the estimate at the beginning of the
Oh,
year.
it was an estimate. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
That's what we use is the estimate of the budget. That was Gerald's estimate for the.
Was that after the?
That would have been gross revenue, gross,
And the other thing is, I
Right.
think we might include in here the town's separate assessed valuation, like some kind of, well, no, because that would be in the bottom, that wouldn't be,
Right.
because otherwise it's just assessed value here. I don't know why, I'm gonna have to look and see why it's different.
well, that was just what we did when we estimated for this year, for the current
Mhm.
FY24 year, FY25 year. And then we always true that up at the end of the year to see what the actual value turned out to be, so, because it's a moving target all throughout the year.
Well, it's true.
Okay, keep rolling.
Keep rolling.
Yep.
So just flipping through the policies, there's lots of information here about the debt policy. Eventually you get to a debt inventory where we're required to complete these documents annually for our debt. Continuing disclosure checklist, which we make sure that anything that we're required to disclose with debt is put on EMMA, which is, I don't actually know what it stands for, something municipal. So it's put out by, the Municipal Bond Rating Agency, and they make sure that any of your, disclosures, make sure that they're all put out there. So like they will make sure that we have our financial report out there and any new debt is posted. We have a fixed assets policy, which is a financial policy beginning on page 229. It talks about depreciation. And then 231 talks about applications for tax exempt status. It just has lots of information there. On page 241, this is our uniform grant policy. We have to have this for federal grants. So that's been adopted by the county as well. The miscellaneous employee related on page 335, this is our county travel policy and what we allow for overnight stays, getting travel approved. There's also, if you keep flipping through, is the forms that are required when you travel and if you needed travel reimbursement. And then after that,
Sorry, what page did that start?
I'm sorry.
Well, you jumped from 249 to 335.
Yes, so the reason why it jumps is because the information after page 249 in the county personnel or the county policy manual doesn't apply to finance.
Oh.
So sorry about that. I should have pointed that out. So when you go to page 335, this is the next section that relates to the finance office. However, I will say there's a portion on fleet in the county policy as well that I didn't copy here. It talks about fleet replacement when we replace our vehicles. But this particular policy was adopted, or I guess the county finance office oversees this policy. The next section is quite a few pages of we had a debt inventory completed in 21. This particular document hasn't been updated for the 22 bond, but could be interesting to you if you want to. So it's after page 346. And this is a Mod Podge of everything, so these pages are not numbered. But it talks about the different sections that's in this inventory. It talks about, the first column is the bonds and description of what's financed, the continuing disclosure requirements, federal tax limitations, and then additional covenants. And I use this to make sure that we comply with each of the bonds that we've issued to perform each piece of the debt covenant. Because like VRA has a special requirement. Trying to remember, BPSA is going to have a special requirement when we get one of their bonds. Most of them have a general debt covenant of make sure you get your financial statements out there, and if you have any major financial changes, make sure you also post that on EMMA. And then it's just a bunch of pages of that assists us in making sure that we comply with debt covenants. if you keep flipping through, you'll eventually come to a cash handling policy. I'll wait for a second until it's after the long columnized pages. I did provide the tabs because I put so much information on here, you might want to use a sticky to separate it. Renee figured it out already. So with this first cash handling policy, this one was done by the treasurer's office, I don't know when, but prior to me arriving. So I took this cash handling policy and created, if you flip a couple more pages, the program and special events cash handling policy. This is what we use to try to get more control of the fair program because it was being done by mostly volunteers. And so there was a lot of concern with internal controls with that. And so I created this, and then a few more pages later is an actual procedure for special event cash handling procedures. What I will say about that policy is that's my internal control policy. It's not been adopted by the board, so it's not an official policy. All official policies have to be adopted by the board.
I mean, we could obviously get way in the weeds in this, but just from my experience of first seeing tickets for the fair and for the special event that was refunded because it's going to be held at a later date, I don't see anything in here with regard to online ticketing or the percentages that the company that you work through charges, et cetera. I mean, should we put some kind of rate limiting steps on that, or?
So each of the providers should be procured through bidding or solicitation, so that we get a fair and reasonable price. I don't recall who we have right now, but if I'm not mistaken, we did do that with this agency. If we continue contracting with them and find that it's no longer reasonable, we can solicit again. And so that would be my recommendation over putting a minimum or a maximum in a policy.
Stephanie, what's your thoughts on any and all financial policies being adopted and approved by the Board of Supervisors instead of any outliers?
I think they should, but I didn't have authority to bring any kind of policy like that to, it was the treasurer's, it's her authority to request those policies, and we didn't have anything for special handling cash events, and I did work with her to get that approved, so the next step would have been for whoever her, him, were at the time to bring that to the board for adoption, and that was not done.
Mr. Jones, how would we go about doing that or getting that? Is that something we just are in limbo unless it's presented, or can we request it?
Unless it's presented,
You'd be kidding me.
But you can request, I mean, they can request.
I think these were
We're
mainly
requesting.
procedures of how to actually go through the process of complying with what policy we had at the time, correct?
So the first cash handling, it's hard because when you call it a policy, it's like, well, if it's a policy, the board should approve it.
That's where my mind was.
Right.
If it's something the county practices, it should be under the whole of the board, not a separate addendum that is an outlier.
So the exception, I would think, would be the treasurer's cash handling policy. Wouldn't she adopt her own? And so my portion that I added was how the county was gonna work with her to do that. Is that considered a policy, and should I have brought that to the board to get approved? I mean, it's whatever the pleasure of the board is, so, I mean, and what I will also say is, this is only as strong as getting people to comply with it, so, you know, I can have these policies and procedures and recommendations, and if it doesn't have the force of law or the force of the board, you know, I can't personally enforce it. It's a procedure at that point, not a true policy.
would suggest perhaps that I get with as well as when we look through all of these internally and then see what should probably be addressed to the board.
I mean, I'm assuming any type of a financial recommendation that would come from an audit committee like this would be that all of their policies that are enforceable at the county level would be approved and have the backing of the Board of Supervisors so that there's teeth in it. I mean, any discussion on that from any member? Any opposing thoughts to that? I'll accept an opposing thought if you have one.
Yeah, because I mean, really, this is a lame duck policy.
No, I understand.
Because it's not been board approved. Other than treasurer's one, I mean, hers, she can
Right.
enforce herself.
Does this apply, Ms. Wells, to like, I say programs, special events, does this apply to any parks and rec, like summer camp?
The special events procedure, or if we adopted a policy, correct, yes, it would.
Seems like a lot of liability there. You have a lot of people paying every week for camp, programming, yoga, soccer. I don't know what all is out there, but it seems like a big black hole.
Yeah, and so the difficulty is that I need the treasurer to be the one to enforce this. Whether the board approves it or not, she can still, am I correct, decide whether or not to enforce the rules. Things like, one thing that's in here, for example, is cash receipt books. I put in here that they have to be issued by the treasurer's office and they have to be numbered, and every time after an event you have to turn it in, and none of that is being complied with. That piece of it is not being complied with. I guess I shouldn't say none of that, but I honestly don't know what the new treasurer, what her policy is about receipt books or funds turned in, things of that nature.
Well, even the issue we had last year, I know we're gonna get to the audit, but with receipt books, cash handling, I think it was at the pet place, right? Wasn't
Oh,
that
at
an
the
issue?
animal control.
Animal control, sorry.
Pet place.
The pet place.
Over across the street at the pet place. I feel like I remember that was an issue.
Yeah. And I have those documents we can
Yeah.
talk about too.
So, I mean, I don't know, Mr. Chairman, are you looking for a formal motion, or are we just gonna ask that, Mr. Jones and as well as get together and report back to us?
To the Board of Supervisors on the policy stuff?
Right.
I mean, I would,
We want to start with the audit, excuse me, I don't mean to be.
You're fine, go ahead.
Should we start with the audit committee and get your buy-in on the policy and then bring it to the board, or?
let's do that. So if you'll bring a model policy here, and then we'll move it from here with action to the Board of Supervisors. Okay? Very good. Pardon my puzzled nature on that. I did not realize that the treasurer had separate subsets of policies that he or she could just choose at a whim to follow them or not. That seems like that could put us into some serious issues if anyone in that office didn't do their job the way they're supposed to. But that's just my opinion. Someone have something?
Well, if you're gonna bring a draft policy back, then I think you should invite comments from the treasurer.
That was my thought as well, I agree.
Well-
And especially for her to review what appears to be a policy that she has now not adopted, but adopted. You know, is she gonna stick to the policy that was written from before, or does she want a new policy?
Well, that brings up a point, at least in my opinion.
Inherited, that's the word I was
And that is, they are an elected official, but they are managing the money of the county. So, does that elected official not have to abide by procedure and policy established in the management of money of the county?
She is her own boss. She's independent of the Board of Supervisors.
So I think it will be good, and I know it's under number 7, we'll talk about, I think it'll be good to have a conversation with the treasurer in this forum to be able to ask some questions and get some feedback on some things. I think that'll be very, very eye-opening and important for us, and we'll discuss that more later.
And this is part of the stickiness of the situation, but we can have a policy of what we do before we get to her. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So we, at Parks and Rec, at the fair, whatever, this is our cash handling policy. When it gets to the treasurer, here you go, whatever your policy is. So we might not be able to, I'm just saying, like,
No,
in
I
her
understand.
department, you know, we can make our folks comply to the T, whatever this is.
Something
then
like
what
that's
happens?
probably making our military folks go, oof, one
Yeah.
set of policies leading in and then an unknown set of policies to see it through. That's, we're going to have to get some clarity on that because that's,
Well, maybe we can come to a consensus with the new treasurer and figure it out from there. Okay.
I'd be interested to know if the cash handlers training, certification training is being completed, and to look at the documentation of that as well as signatures and dates, because, you know, that's part of, I think, the reason that we're all sitting here as an audit committee is like you kind of say you do something, but then did we do it? Be interested to look at the documentation prior to the fair this year.
And who exercises control over that training process?
You know, one of the reasons these procedures were put in place 3 or 4 years ago was we had such large amounts of cash being handled at the fair, and you know, just that I mean, it was like tens of thousands of dollars collected, and you know, so you need to have a lot of people involved in accounting and documentation, and you know, put it in bags, sealed bags, with places involved, and things like that. We've dropped dramatically the amount of cash we handle because a lot of people do it online now, and so we've been encouraging that. And I know a lot of times you probably noticed this, if you go to some events now, there's no cash. They won't accept cash. And I think it's because of issues that can arise because of so much cash being handled. But the good thing is that has gone down, but there's still a fair amount of cash that handled that.
I know that almost at any ticketing station, you can use a credit card.
Yes. And we fixed the internet issues out there, so everybody has access now. We were having trouble with people not being able to get through, and we've actually got boosters out there now that get more bandwidth.
Okay.
all right.
So marching orders on that one. Looking through to see what's next. So the yellow tab. Go ahead.
Before you advance to the yellow tab, point of clarification. It says manuals revised in March of this year. Is it an annual revision that you go through? Or?
No, so any policy that is changed during a year, we stamp it with this date. But Bobby has policy changes on a regular basis. It just so happens that this one was last changed in some form at that time. So,
Okay.
and this was pulled from the internet. It's up under government, and on the left-hand side, it says county policy. And so every time we have an update, it's uploaded there. So that was the last update.
Okay. And I guess the updates are driven by two things. One is statutory changes that we have to comply with.
One, yep.
And then the other one would be discretionary changes to the chairman's question about should we have some control over discretionary changes to policies, right?
That would go to the Board of Supervisors, right?
Yeah, we have different changes, like the staff might find something that needs to be improved.
We've done that numerous times over the years, yeah.
Virginia has something where it comes up with just, we find that what our practice is doesn't match the policy, so we amend the policy.
Thank you, Bobby.
All right.
So sticking to the agenda, the next section, it talks about fund accounting, which is the yellow tab. There's some discussion. This is in our annual comprehensive financial report as a description of what's in the financial report, and then what the different funds and what does a fund mean? What is a fund? Do you want to go through this in any detail, or just leave it and you'll read it later?
I would love to hear it discussed to some detail.
Yeah, I think it's
She's
some
doing great,
discussion.
you're doing great.
I feel like I'm doing a whole lot of talking. This is just too much.
We're doing a whole lot of listening.
Okay,
That's
good.
very
All right.
It's very good.
Well,
All right, no problem. All
Thank you
right.
for your efforts.
Yeah.
So Under management discussion and analysis, one of the things that the county has to provide in the financial reports. And so this top section with this little, it's kind of ugly, but it's what we have at the moment. You didn't do it, did you? You laughed a little bit. That wasn't yours,
I did
was it?
laugh.
Oh, you were. I thought you
I
were.
can't remember 15 years ago, really.
I don't think it was yours. I think this is actually about 20 some years old. But anyway, so one part is management discussion and analysis, and there's a whole big section in the front of our CAFR that there's information in there. The next section of the report is basic financial statements. This is the meat of our document. And then there's required supplementary information, and there's a whole list of things that we have to comply with as far as that's concerned. So what's government-wide financial statements? We have fund accounting, and fund accounting rolls up into full accrual accounting. And so the government-wide financial statements takes everything, all the small parts of the county, rolls it up into one main financial statement. Then we have the fund financial statements, and that breaks it back down, and then notes of financial statements gives you all the detail about what does this all mean. It's a whole lot to read through, but there is a lot of information there. And then the statements, that bottom section describes what the statements are. There's a lot of detail there. So if you flip over to the next page, page 9, government-wide financial statement. So it tells you a little more about what the county has. So the first dark section for governmental activities, that's all the government functions the county serves. Social services, EMS, government, just like the administration part, judicial, everything that the county does that's a governmental activity rolls up into that statement. And including schools. So schools and EDA are considered component units, and so they are a section on that government-wide statement. Business type activities, that's our enterprise, which is public utilities, stormwater. And then component units, that's the schools and EDA. So they each have their own set of statements in the financial statements. Fund financial statements, this is what I was talking about, the smaller funds, like we have a social services fund, we have E911 fund, obviously the big one, the general fund. So there's lots of funds that roll up into that government-wide statement. And that's considered governmental funds. And that talks again about proprietary, what's a proprietary fund, and then what's a fiduciary fund.
That's not what
So, one thing that I've always liked to explain to citizens that when we're talking about fund accounting, think of general fund, that's the overall, let's say the corporation. If you got a General Motors Corporation, that's a general fund. Then all the subsidiary funds are
Business units.
Or business units, exactly. So you have the utility fund, like I said, the 911 fund, things like that. And then the component units would be subsidiaries, I guess, of the overall company. But the general fund is the big fund. That's where most everything goes on. But it helps to give people a little bit of analogy, because people hear funds, they don't understand what we're talking about. But that's the way I like to explain it if I'm trying to talk to a community group of, what is the county? How does the county function? And that's, our general fund is $108 million this year. That's the bulk of where all the money is.
And one thing too that's important to talk about in relation to an annual financial report is fund statements are a modified accrual. So there are certain things that we will accrue, like revenues in 45 days. Any revenues received within 45 days, that's in our policy that we accrue that. I think the Governmental Accounting Standards Board says you can go out to 60, but ours is 45 days. And then those fund financial statements that roll up into government-wide, that's full accrual. And so you see different numbers on the statements based on how much is accrued. And so things like long-term assets are something that you would find in full accrual that you won't find in the government fund financial statements. I put a note here that budgets and annual appropriations are approved on a cash basis, because when we spend that money, it's the board approved $1,000, we spend $1,000. You can't say, okay, well now we're going to accrue some revenues and we really have $1,500. We don't spend that accrual piece of it. although you can use funds received after the end of the fiscal year to pay current fiscal year finances. But that's a big accounting stuff that's not really as important as knowing that our budgets are based on a cash basis. We spend and receive on that cash basis. Other than the revenue accrual that we do, but that's still in fund statements, not in the budgeted approval.
Well, this may be the wrong thing, but I've always looked at the general fund as being the operational side of the day-to-day operational side of the county. The business, the transactions all day long. And then there's a separate fund, the capital funds and capital monies that are not necessarily included in the general fund because they're standalone.
So we have several funds that are still operational. E911 is a good example.
I'm sorry?
E911 is an operational fund. We have different special revenue funds that can still be operational expenditures. Our capital fund is capital purchases. So we don't put anything operational in there other than occasionally different types of major maintenance, repair and maintenance will sometimes go in that fund because we budget capital maintenance funds in that fund. There's a little bit of differing opinion about whether or not you should even have that in the capital fund, but we've always done it, so that's where it is. It's not necessarily right or wrong, or we would have had an audit finding over it. It's just most of our capital is there and it's not operating. DSS is an operating fund. So all of that rolls up into our main general fund at some point. But there are other funds that we have that are operating. Just an explanation. General fund is our main operating fund for most of what we do with the county. All of our public safety, other than E911, the courts, the operational side, like county attorney, county administrator. So it does have most of our operational functions in it.
And don't the rules on the capital side also, aren't they a little bit different on how you can expend monies? Very, very specific to what the debt was, and how the debt was structured?
Sort of. So it depends on what funds you funnel into the capital fund. If you have things in there besides bond funds, then you can spend that unallocated funding, that unrestricted funding on anything you want to spend it on. You could even take it back out of the capital fund if you wanted to. When it's put into the capital fund, if it's unrestricted, it becomes assigned. And because it's only assigned and not restricted, you could take it out at any time by board approval. We don't move between funds. In our budget ordinance, it talks about we don't move between funds without board approval, but if it's unrestricted, you can move it out. Restricted bond funds, you cannot.
So borrowed money and bond funds.
Borrowed and granted money. Sometimes we have grants that are capital grants that would go in there and we can't spend that on anything but
So it's
what's restricted
as
for.
well.
Our special revenue fund, which we have our main one is our grants fund. We have special revenues that go in there that are grants all the time, and we can't spend those on anything. But we also have some assigned money in there as well that was assigned to match specific grants. And if at some point you no longer need those to match those grants, you could pull them back out. Anything else?
Fun?
Oh, I love it. I love what I do. I do.
There's so many pieces of it, and the general governmental activities on page 9 here that we're looking at just gives a snapshot. But I mean, this document here shows all the various. We have a lot of pieces of the puzzle that most folks don't realize just how large of a management scale that it really is. So.
Which is why I always try to get Mr. Grace not to take those like cigarette money that you want to put to this or this money that you want to put to that or used to. It's like, no, don't do that, because that adds one more layer of something that we have to manage. But it also ties your hands as well. If you ever wanted to use those funds on something else, then you have to come back to the board and get them unrestricted and things of that nature. But
That's the reason I wanted it restricted.
I understood.
I would
Trust
just
me,
like us to charge it.
I'm sorry?
I would just
Oh,
like us to
just
charge
to
it.
start with the tax. Yeah, with the cigarette tax, right?
Well, that's a conversation for another time. What
Didn't
else
mean
you
to
got, Ms.
pull
Ross?
that out of them. All right, so that was fund accounting. So
Okay.
audit findings or recommendations from auditor.
Yes.
So if you will humor me for a little bit, I'd like to talk about the audit process and a lot of the things that we have and do during the audit. So this first page under purple is called a PBC list or provided by client list. And it goes through a list of things that the auditor requests from the finance department or sections of the county, like for instance, the schools, the treasurer's office, commissioner of revenue. And all of these things have to be provided to the auditor so that they can audit the finances of the county. Make sure that the documentation that we put out is materially accurate. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff here.
I will say that this is actually the first time that I've seen the PBC list. I mean, I knew it was quite a bit of stuff, but this makes it very real.
Yep.
Yeah, all I've seen is the
Goodness
letter.
gracious.
I've
Yeah.
never seen the list either.
Yeah, this is
Well, so the
wow.
PBC comes straight to the finance office,
Sure.
and yeah, we've never shared it before, but I mean.
Well, there's really wouldn't be no need to, but
And
This is
it's pretty level year after year. It's rare that it changes by much, because they're looking for the same thing each year. Sometimes, I'm sorry,
I'm sorry, PVC again, what was the answer?
provided by client.
PVC.
Yeah, it's a random acronym, but it's
it's
documentation.
just what they're requiring.
Right, right. So this next page, I might have gotten this a little out of order, but I can talk about it anyway. So this is what we put in front of the board, well, have the board sign off that we have provided the annual financial report and audit, and we have to provide this to the Virginia Public Auditor of Public Accounts, saying that the board has seen this and it's required annually. So there is a requirement that the board sees the audit each year in financial reports. The next section is, it's really just junk. But I wanted to show y'all how we try to manage that PBC list. We create a list of everything they're requesting, what department they're requesting it from, who's the contact that is responsible for it, the date that we want it back to the finance office or back to the auditor. And I just
Good to know.
wanted to provide that to y'all so that y'all know how we manage the process. And it's really just a bunch of stuff, so don't feel like you have to read through that. I just was trying to provide a visual of how we
But this is a great level of detail to be able to understand just how large this process is and how far-reaching. So I appreciate I'm typically the bottom line kind of person, but I appreciate these kind of details, especially when you've never.
Well, I mean, I figured you might want
Understood it
to know
fully.
what you're responsible for reviewing, you know, if
Yeah.
this is what's going on behind closed doors, behind the scenes. And so this is how we make sure that what we're doing is accurate and well managed, I guess. I know,
Well,
it's
to
so
me,
old.
to me,
Not
this
only
looks
that, look at
like
the
this
year.
time.
Look at the year.
To me, this looks like this time of year is really busy for you.
Oh
with the audit.
gosh, it is so busy right now.
Because
I'm so glad you mentioned that. No.
because all of these dates as far as requesting documents, the PDC are last week of September, first week of October, which is like today.
Today.
Right. So, just for example, Chair McCarty, if you'll just allow, if you just took one of these departments, I don't know, let's just look at the treasurer, for example. And then under the PBC list, it's like page 3, daily cash reports, and then the next subsequent 5 bullets. Like, how are we doing on that?
I actually provided a calendar, and we can talk about that when we get to that section, because it does ask about actor status. Is it okay if we talk about where we are as far as being out? And we're behind. Just go ahead and give you a preview.
You say we're behind. What do you mean?
We're often behind. We provide the calendar as a guide, but has to be best case scenario, or because we don't want to provide a worst case scenario when things will be provided, because then we might be late and fall short of the goal.
So we don't have the treasurer here, so Lisa,
Correct.
you here, Mr. Barry?
Yes.
This says starting, ending 9/25, school statements to the county, so. We behind on that, or do we have the, we're behind on that, okay.
I felt actually pretty bad for you
Kind of.
having to come to these past two meetings, knowing how busy you are being just you down there, but.
Yeah, I have a draft of the financial statements done, just getting to the entity-wide or government-wide where we have to do the full accrual. That's where I'm behind. And I had, a month or two ago, I had talked with Stephanie and requested that if her staff could help me out with a couple of those pieces. I currently have a payroll specialist, and 2 other accounting technicians. That's my staff.
So yeah, she's behind and I'm behind. So I will definitely go into that more detail with that shortly. So
I believe I've made great progress.
I think she's made great progress too. The things that she's been asking me for, I'm like, okay, she's on it. I mean, compared to recent memory, she's much further along than others. have
It's
been.
like almost one whole page of this is
schools,
school, right?
Lisa, how many staff do you need? Like, how many positions do you?
The primary or biggest position is the coordinator of finance, and that position has been vacant for some time, but I have hired and do have somebody starting on October 21st.
Oh yay!
And then I
Okay.
have an accountant position,
Nothing. Go
Okay.
ahead.
and have an accountant position that we continue to advertise, so I will have a staff of 5.
You're right, I have 3.
Right. Well, because what I'm hearing is the schools are relying heavily on.
I wouldn't say heavily.
Okay, let me rephrase. The schools are relying in some fashion on the county's finance department, and the treasurer is leaning obliteratingly heavy upon our finance office. So,
That might be why we're behind.
and so that's why I wrote a note down here. Is it probably would help us to be able to explain, because let's say someone getting the minutes of this say, I knew something was wrong. Our county's behind. Are we behind in a sense that
We're not emergency behind.
okay? That's
And
what I
we
want to know.
typically run behind these dates. I intentionally put these dates to give myself a couple of weeks to a month.
Okay, that helps.
I don't believe the schools are holding you,
The
keeping you
schools,
behind this
the
year.
schools aren't holding me up because I haven't even gotten to that point. That's how far behind I am. And obviously, not obviously, but I will say, if I was close to that being a problem, I would have contacted you by now.
Yeah.
But luckily, I know that there's some pieces that we're going to be helping you with, so I'm aware of that. I'm also aware of where my office is and how far behind we are. The goal is when Robinson Farmer Cox show up on October 28th.
Oh, so they're at May 21st at the schools.
Are they coming early? Did they contact you yet?
I thought that was always the date.
So the week, it's the week of, so if they haven't contacted you, I'm not sure that's a firm date. So they may actually not be there until the 28th. But,
So we're still going to meet our benchmark dates.
maybe. But not because of schools.
Okay.
I've heard what is staff shortages in the schools.
Schools,
Do you have staff shortages as well?
I do.
And what are those, please?
So, most recently, we lost our only purchasing person. I shouldn't say lost the right word, lost. And then before that, we had a vacant accounting position because, so technically Nancy retired. The accounting position that we took over from the treasurer's office was filled. Then Nancy retired. That person moved into that job, and then somebody from utilities was helping because they had the knowledge. Well, that somebody in their department left, So that pushed back my accounting, not having an accounting person. So I actually, and then most recently, the person that took over for senior accountant is also leaving. So I actually have 3 vacancies right now.
Out of how many?
So including purchasing 9.
Out of 9, you
3
have
out.
3 vacancies.
So actually technically I have 4 vacancies because there's 2 allowed positions in purchasing. But some of the issues in purchasing department didn't allow that to be filled, so it stayed vacant for a while, mostly because we can't find qualified applicants. But, so purchasing aside, that still leaves 2 in finance that's vacant.
So with the county's experience of being late,
The county hasn't been late, the schools have been late, but yes, sir,
Well-
sorry.
I'm putting that in the context, it all flows through the county.
Correct, okay,
right?
yes, sir,
I'm not placing blame,
yes, sir,
I'm addressing an issue.
yes, sir.
We now have 2 or 3 people short in your department, 2 or 3 people short in your department. Isn't there, or aren't there agencies that we can go to and get roll up your sleeves type people with experience? Now, that it's not inexpensive.
Yeah, I didn't get to the solution part of where we were, so yes, sir, you're completely right. I do have a temp, and I've actually used hiring agencies to hire somebody that doesn't start until November 1st, unfortunately. So we have started employing those things. I'm not sure about on the school side, but the county side, yes, we have definitely been doing that.
I mean, we had less than a favorable audit last year. And so I'm thinking that the money at this particular point is not necessarily the driving force. Accounting for it is, but getting folks in here to get us back on the right track is much more important. So that's just my opinion.
Right. I'm not sure, the issues on the county side, I cannot speak for the schools, but the issues on the county side are related to the incorrect transactions from another department and have nothing to do with the finance office. So my shortages are not, staff shortages are not affecting our ability to get the audit done on time and properly.
So it's the content that was in question of the process.
I don't think I understand.
It wasn't the material process that you controlled that was cited in the audit. as being involved.
From prior years, but referring to this year in particular, we can't close our year because there's transactions that have not been corrected in another department. And that's slowing all the other pieces down because I can't do somebody else's job for them when I'm trying to keep my department above float. And so while I keep trying to push that process along and help with that process, it's not getting anywhere at present. However, between the temp, the new person starting, and being able to convince somebody else to extend their term of employment, I think we might be able to at least be on time with the financial report. Unfortunately, if we don't have, I will be surprised if we don't have a finding this year for some transactional issues.
Another department you refer to, is that under the county administration?
No,
It's a separate.
that's the treasurer's office,
Okay.
and I'll say it.
The question that I would ask them, very simply,
You don't have to say it, I'll say it.
is
You can't do anything to me.
what legal recourse does the board have?
0 at this point. We even extended extra position funding through me, Mr. Keaton's office, to the treasurer's office, and it was rejected by email. So anyway,
Okay, I know that technically, there's technicality, but you also have taxpayers' monies that have to be handled appropriately. And if there's a failure in that exercise, Isn't that criminal?
There has not been such a show. She is receiving the money and depositing the money and paying bills. And that is her duty.
The incorrect accounting for it does not rise to the level of defeasance of duties or whatever that's called, malfeasance.
Unless, as long as she gets it correct. She has an annual requirement.
And if she passes her state audit this year, I'll be shocked.
And then once that, there is recourse, but at this point, there's no interim challenges.
It's like you can see a potential wreck that already happened down the freeway, but until it actually wrecks, you can't.
Can't call 911.
So, and we've gotten a little ahead. I've given some leeway. We've gotten a little ahead because those are some of the things I was going to talk about in number 7. That are some of the real challenges that the county has right now, of which our hands are tied in certain ways. And Ms. Wells and her staff have been well beyond their own duties to make sure that we are keeping up with certain benchmarks and things, to include things like bond payments on time. You miss a bond payment, which I believe we were very close.
Hour and a half.
Sorry.
I'm just saying. Hour and a half.
So those are the things that impact us, that that are delicate, and that I would venture to say that most citizens do not know. They probably will now, but up until this point, they don't understand fully the inner workings.
Just
Yes,
to
sir.
log it, Chair, and maybe Mr. Jones can provide an insight. I dealt with the only county that's got sort of this kind of disconnect, for lack of a better term, between departments, elected officials. Have we seen any best practices in other counties to kind of get over these kinds of hurdles?
There's a lot of differences in some areas. I'll let him speak to it, but we've looked into some things, Mr. Jones.
I know Chesapeake relieved the treasurer of some duties, but they weren't her mandated duties.
Right.
They took utility billing away from her. Well, we do our utility billing anyway. She's not doing that for us, our treasurer.
As of January 1, but yes.
But that wasn't a required duty. So in Chesapeake, they relieved all the treasurer. And again, it's a bit different because they have a charter and the requirements are different than what we have. But they relieved the treasurer of duties that were not mandated duties to do that. And so, our treasurer is doing, at this point, really what is required of her by statute from a standpoint of, you know,
With our department making sure, hey, get that bond payment done, and yeah. And that's kind of what I've talked with Mr. Keaton about, and can we talk about this in public? I mean, in a public forum?
I've already brought it. I mean, I've thrown the elephant on the table. So, I mean, at this
I mean,
point,
she's not an employee, so it's not an employee.
she's not an employee. It's not a closed session issue. It would be like if you all discussed any publicly elected official. We're fair game.
Well, I mean, I'm sure I make mistakes every day, but one of the things that Randy and I discussed is how much do we do for her so that the county doesn't fall on its face. And so bond payment's an obvious one. You know, keeping an eye and making sure that all of these things are done are pretty obvious. But then you get into this piece of paper and, you know, how much of this do I keep doing to make sure things are taken care of? And I don't know, we're still working through that.
The bond payment was the most egregious one the other day. I mean, literally, Stephanie sent her information a month ahead of time. Hey, the bond payments will be on this date. That morning followed up. Hey, just want to make sure you get the bond payment out. No response. So literally about an hour and a half, we just finally had to send the bond payment so we wouldn't be in default.
That's the paper.
Oh, you just never had to deal with this before.
So the question becomes, do you stop the support let the county take what is obviously that the.
This was given to me.
audit process, and you supply the help to try to keep our audit clean.
And there are
Yeah,
some
that's-
things that I simply can't do, and one example right now is the corrections. I don't know how to do it, I've never done it before, so because it's under her purview, I can't just walk in there and say, okay, I'm taking over your program and I'm gonna make sure these corrections are done myself. I
What do you
mean,
mean correction?
so if something is posted in the wrong month, reversed in the wrong month, that's the only thing I can think of off the top of my head. They have to be corrected to the correct period so that your general ledger matches your accounts receivables, and it's just something that just has to be done. It's
Housekeeping.
Statements.
basic accounting, yeah.
Accounting 101.
Yeah, and so the system for receiving taxes is not under my purview, that's under her purview. So I can't just go in there and start making changes to her accounting system, well, not accounting system, but her receipting system without her saying, yes, I agree, this is right or not right, or, I mean, I can say, hey, this looks wrong, you need to fix it. Oh yeah, I'm fixing it, I'm working on it, but it still hasn't been corrected. So, you know, we're in a situation where things are out of balance, and I can see they're out of balance, but I need her to let me take over. If I'm going to do it, I would need her to let me take over that process and fix it for her. Not to mention I'd have to have somebody show me, but I'm not worried about that piece. I can get somebody to show me how to do it, but
Precarious situation.
Right.
This cannot be the first time in the Commonwealth history
right.
that this has happened.
And it may be a situation of why some places have findings, or why, I don't remember the locality that was 5 years behind in their financial statement. Maybe they've had similar situations, and I honestly couldn't say.
I think
I've never been in this position, but
And I have searched for routes of remedy, but have not found one that's viable for a board of supervisors up to this point. So that's one of the pieces to the entire process that affects the whole.
From a purely a taxpayer standpoint, the bond rating that we have worked so hard to get, the A+, AA+ rating, I think probably saves us, how many points? Half a point?
I'm not sure, I mean, it's hard, I'd have to ask Jimmy, because it probably depends on, based on the market at the time, but it certainly saves us money.
It's real money,
I
absolutely.
mean, it's out of pocket taxpayer money. And so, and it's over an extended period of time.
Absolutely.
and it's public trust as well.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
public wants us to do right by their funds, and we're
Well,
could do better right
that's
now.
that's the goal that should be for any of us that are involved in public
Right.
dollar management.
Right.
All right, let's continue to move on. I know we spent a little bit of time on that, so thank you for your indulgence there. Go ahead.
That's okay. So next is the contract with the auditor and several documents that are really just things that we agree to do for the auditor, things they agree to do for the county as far as the management. So I don't know if y'all are even really interested in any of those documents or what they mean, but I'd be glad to explain what they are anytime y'all might be interested.
Do you re-sign this every year, the
Yes.
contract?
Yeah.
Because it says complete all field work by October 20th, letter for review by November 10th, all that's gonna change?
So the date would change, yes, based on, and this, I don't know that this is 24s, this is probably 23s.
It says 23.
23, yep.
So yes, if the field work says October 20th, I time to do field work October 20th? I don't remember, I think it was November 5th, but then again, we were running late last year. But the last 2 pages under that tab are examples of fraud questionnaires that are provided to key personnel and also some board. I don't know if all board members or just the chair and vice chair. But then the back book, there's the details. We can talk about the status of the audit if you'd like.
Can I ask a quick question, Mr. Chair?
Yep.
And that is, when they do an audit, it's based on samples. There's no way that you look at our book
Correct.
and that level of detail. But when you have a finding, does it not spur a additional sampling in the area of the finding?
So typically, yeah. So when they have a finding, they haven't written up anything official yet at that point, but they typically will expand to find out how large the misstatement could be.
Do they communicate that to us?
Yeah, because they'll ask us for more documentation.
And so that they're asking is the way to get it. It's not necessarily, we want to see an extra 10% of this activity.
Yeah, they'll ask that, yes. But I mean, they'll say exactly, let's say we give them, a lot of times we'll give them our check, we'll always give them our check register. And they'll do a sampling of that check register, and if they find 5 checks with some kind of misstatement or error, they'll say, okay, we want 15 more, or whatever. Let's say they pull purchasing records, and 1 has an error. They may pull 10 more purchasing records to see how far does this error really expand. They do the same thing at DSS too, with DSS
But
records.
that's in the, I'm looking at it in the context of, we had a finding in a specific area last year.
Mm-hmm.
So when they begin the audit, they look at a wider sampling this year.
Not necessarily. I mean, they might look more closely at that program. It depends on the level of misstatement, and they're concerned about whether or not it's a fixable item, whether or not they think it's pervasive. It just, that's really up to the auditor's purview to figure that out.
Well, I'm going to use the example that I'm familiar with. Last year, we spent a great deal of time, your staff,
Mm-hmm.
and part of the staff at the school, of catching up on recouping the cash that was presented forward. I'm not using very good accounting terms.
Grant reimbursement.
Grant reimbursements. Oh, good, that's good, I'm glad you said that. I was getting lost.
What's funny is, maybe not funny, but you can figure that out with the same sample every year. Almost always. You can, especially, like I said, if it's pervasive. If it's a big deal, you're going to see it again. It's not going to take you a larger sample. But there are instances where they will look at the whole program, yes.
I think we were 3 million, something like that. Right?
Short of reimbursement requests. Yes.
I would just,
How do we think we
We
ended
did
this
eventually
year?
get our money back.
I was saying they did eventually get the requests in.
Do you think people got them in this time?
Oh, I'm very happy to say that all the requests are in.
Okay.
We like hearing that. Very good.
Great.
And I've addressed every one of these, so.
Excellent.
Annual school report was sent before September 30th. Grant funds completely reconciled, and we've received all the actual dollars, but I think it's one grant. All the ESSER funds got spent and requested for reimbursement, so
Thank you.
it's sort of been fun.
I think last year we were doing that in December, weren't we doing the request in December, Stephanie?
over Christmas vacation.
Sorry,
The
yes.
grant,
Mhm.
yeah.
I spent a considerable amount of my own time
I'm
on
sure.
this.
Thank you.
Wouldn't have gotten there otherwise.
So, Mr. Berry says that her reports have all been turned in on time. This reporting schedule? Do you
Which
think, is
one?
this just general, where it says like treasury, quarterly, SPDA, deposit? September
At the
1,
beginning.
APA treasurers, have all those been
The
submitted on time?
SPDA I confirmed the other day have not been
This
done. On the first, looking at the first page.
I believe that's where she's at, is on the
Yes.
front page.
So SPDA is Secure Public Deposit Act, and so they've changed where the localities have to confirm the deposits on hand that the banks say are on hand. And it was done for the first quarter, and it has not been done for second quarter.
We did ours for those school activity funds. We verified
That was
all
something
those.
on the regional level, like at the TPO, PDC, that they came and presented, and none of the elected officials sitting there, because it's something new, everyone was like, there's a new what?
Yeah.
And so, everybody was working to try to catch that up because it was something very new to,
I think just
everybody.
the process in which you go verify it was new, but it's always been
okay.
that there has to be sufficient funds on hand. If a banking institution holds public funds, they have to have so much in collateral
Okay.
to cover that.
So second quarter was due,
They gave until September 28th to post it, and it hadn't been done.
Would that be a finding, an audit finding?
I can't speak for our auditor at this point. I don't know.
Okay.
I haven't asked him if he, if a certain number had to be done, if they all had to be done, or it was a finding.
They told the TPO and PDC Finance Audit Committee that I'm on that if we did not have them in, that they would be considering that as a finding, a material finding for the regional bodies.
Well, I did do
So-
the one for our main accounts, so maybe the other accounts are immaterial enough that we won't have a finding.
Okay.
I can't answer that
how
for,
about the one that was due September 1st?
as far as I know, I can't speak to that actually because I'm not in a position to have received that document, so I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. The October 31st unclaimed property is actually only due every 5 years, and we haven't done it for a couple of years because there's been no staff to do it, but
It's very time-consuming.
yeah, it is. But what they were doing was they were doing it within like 90 days at the end of the fiscal year, and to me, the difficulty for that is that doesn't give people whose checks were lost or things of that nature time to actually get their money instead of sending it straight to the state. And so I actually was part of delaying that for a couple of years to wait and let older checks be reported rather than every fiscal year, that fiscal year being reported.
How many years do you?
I would recommend 2 years. I think it's 5 years is the
That was what Norfolk Schools was, and I'm like, 5 years? Are
Yeah.
you kidding me?
yeah. I think 2 is reasonable. It gives enough time for you to clear that process out. If somebody's just having issues with
Is that a rolling 2 years?
it. Yes. I think I know what you mean. If I understand you correctly, I would say so. Like, so you just would add 1 year, like that 1 year would fall off and next year comes on. Yes. So do we want to talk about these audit documents that's in the back of the binder?
One more under the treasury
Sure.
reporting schedule, turnover audit
We finally got that done.
should have been done when the treasurer turned over, and it was done in September.
That sounds correct. I think it was September that we finally got it formalized. We could kind of talk about how I did that too. Probably should. We don't need to, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're good. Thank you.
Sure. So the first document is the independent auditor's report. What everybody talks about, your audit. This is your audit. This is your audit. Well, this letter is our audit. This is the book we put it in. We put it in this book, but this is our audit. It's not the findings. It's the letter that says, does your financial statements materially reflect what you're doing financially? And this letter says we are. The important paragraph is paragraph. In our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects the financial position of governmental activities and business type, blah, blah, blah. If there was, I was thinking there was another paragraph. Talks about qualified or unqualified somewhere. And maybe it doesn't because ours wasn't a negative Nancy. But basically this letter is the audit that says we do a fair job of presenting the financial condition of the county. The next section of documents, this is where our findings are. At the top it says independent auditors report on internal control or financial reporting, blah, 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 blah. So they talk a little bit about internal controls and whether or not they are sufficient to find any issues. They're not guaranteeing our internal controls are what they exactly need to be. They're just saying they're sufficient for what they're looking for. Then it talks about compliance on each major federal program, and so if you flip, you'll see some really tiny writing. That's a schedule of federal awards that's required because we get federal funds. Schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And then, if you flip over one page, it starts talking about that schedule of federal awards. That's just a reconciliation. But on page 276, it starts with the schedule of findings and the question cost. Unmodified is what you want. Internal control, material weakness identified, yes. Significant deficiencies identified, none reported. Non-compliance material to financial statements, no. That's because we reported the shortages, or however you want to term that, what was reported fairly in the financial statements. Internal control, no material weaknesses. Unmodified report you want. Audit findings disclosed that are required to be reported with CFR, so that's a federal designation, so we do have federal programs. And then they list the federal programs with the issue. The $750,000 threshold, if we have funds over $750,000 that we receive from the federal government, we are required to have a single audit, which is what this is. And we're considered a low-risk auditee. Turn the page, and then it talks more in detail what the material weakness was, what the federal findings and questions cost, and then the next page talks about the Commonwealth of Virginia findings. And that's because of the SFR school report. Annual school report that's due to the state.
It's always due like around the 15th, but they always give you 2 weeks.
So that's what.
So we had three, like the Cliff Notes, was the 2 pages.
Yep. The Steph's notes.
The wet notes.
Steph's. Anyway.
So one was a material weakness. One was an eligibility finding from federal awards,
That was a child nutrition program.
and one was a Commonwealth of Virginia finding
Right, that was
for the
late
school
report.
late reporting.
This last page is a management letter that the auditors provide to the board and management. And it talks about things that, while they didn't rise to the level of a material weakness, it's things that we could improve on for future.
I haven't seen this one.
So the first section is school board grants, school board posting of transactions and journal entries, school board reconciliations of account balances. All of this stuff is going to be against the county this year. School board budget, I think we're budgeting fine. Operating fund balance for the schools. County cash collections, you mentioned the animal control. That's this section here. for the cash receipts.
Oh, and on the, for the schools, we covered the deficit from last year, and on top of that, we provided, it's, it's under, after my statements are audited, but my estimate is that we will return $112,000 back to the county.
Wow.
That's preliminary, isn't it?
Pardon me?
That's the preliminary numbers now?
Yes, we covered the deficit, and on top of that, are gonna be returning about $112,000 back to the county.
So see, the schools are ahead of us now. They're ahead of us this year. We're doing good.
Very good.
So the meals and lodging tax forms was something with the Commissioner of Revenue's office. I don't know how they're retaining them, but apparently they're not retaining them sufficiently. And then the reporting deadline, the ACFR was late going to the Virginia Auditor of Public Accounts.
So, the pet place one, that one's fixed. Are we doing a receipt book?
I don't know.
Do we know, Randy?
Sure.
I think that's another one of those areas that is beyond the reach of the Board of Supervisors, and it goes underneath the
Sure.
sheriff's purview.
Well, then there's one about Parks and Rec too, though. The Parks and Rec is, they
okay.
need to, they have,
Oh.
they're the reason we created the special events cash handling policy.
Right.
Because it's not a finger pointing at Parks and Rec, it's the nature of what they're doing, that they need this. So,
And I think they've implemented some systems. I know Mike was talking about the other day that they're utilizing the SPICE system for doing reservations and facility. But they have improved their collection processes there.
And so these are part of other recommendations that aren't necessarily material findings.
These are just good. I mean, it's just a good. Hey, here's some things we think you should do a little differently. They're not bad, but they're ways we can improve.
Can anything in this document rise to the level of a material finding?
absolutely.
So, which leads me to the question of, would it be a good idea for any municipality to set aside something like this and say, well, we just don't agree that we need to do that? Like, we wouldn't say that, correct?
Answer's no.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I do think it's interesting that Lisa hadn't seen this till just now.
I've seen this one.
Because there's quite a few things that, speak to what she does.
I mean, I really thought that, when somebody told me that they really had a lot to clean up, I realized to what degree that was over there.
So what degree was it?
Beyond, I don't know what in the world was going on over there. Now, some of the things that they did or didn't do, it's like,
I did not intentionally leave out any information with you when I was talking about it.
Lisa used to think Randy was a friend.
We are thrilled that you're a part of the schools
Yeah.
and helping to
I enjoy
dig through
doing
that.
it. Randy knows that, how I enjoy cleaning up messes.
So here's a neat question on stuff like this. Is
Maybe I'll become the treasurer next.
Well, there's a
Did you move to the
plan.
county?
There's a plan.
There's a ticket. You know that you fill out, you'll be on the ticket.
Yep. Not this year.
Well, there's no election this year, but next time.
so on things like this, say moving forward, would it be, and I'll
Yesterday.
leave it to the rest of the committee to give an opinion, to see how the county has fully implement and the date they implemented whatever changes were recommended? Do you think that would be something that would be valuable?
That's what I was thinking.
Most definitely.
Okay.
I mean, you're in the midst of the audit right now, and I think that if you found out that any of these recommendations weren't being complied with, it would have a positive impact on an outcome if we were to at least get them started. And follow up, make sure they had. The question is, who would be the point person in the county?
I usually follow up with the different departments before the auditor comes, just to ask if they have any updates. I don't, I'll like send them their portion, like I've sent the treasurer's office their portion, I sent schools their portion last year, which you wouldn't have been here yet, but,
They're coming in when, the 28th of this month?
yeah, we should talk to Aaron, make sure to, you have a solid date, but yes. I think it'll be around the 28th. It'll be the 21st or the 28th, which is tomorrow, basically.
So the page and a half of these are really into the schools, but then who can follow up with sheriff and Parks and
Animal
Rec and
control.
Mr. Waltney?
Yeah.
We'll check for those. One, I would say, just one of the things is, you know, when they do the audit, you're halfway through the fiscal year that they're getting ready to audit again next year. So
Right.
by the time you get this management letter, you're already halfway through the fiscal year. So if you've had any problems in the first 6 months, it's still going to be there the following audit. So it usually takes, a lot of times it takes 2 years to get something completely cleaned up, because theoretically you might have still been doing it wrong for 6 months by the time you know you're doing it wrong.
Well, if we were to get this checked and find out that it's not being done, okay, what I'm saying is it would be a good time to start.
Yeah, exactly.
You're halfway through the second year.
Yes, right, that's right.
But Mr. Keaton, in the process of these audits, both the responsible managers, aren't they following what the auditor is doing, and don't they have some kind of understanding when the auditor walks out the door of what they're gonna be reading about? It's kind of like, when you're on the ship and you get the inspection, you know when it's going bad. You know, if you go. You know
Yeah,
what
I think a lot of times, because if they're over there at the, let's say, animal control, looking, they're probably telling the staff, hey, you should have a receipt book, you know, for example. I mean, that's.
Right.
I'm not involved with that process, but absolutely they should,
Yeah.
yeah.
But in some instances, you're gonna have staff turnover.
Right.
So the staff who were involved during the audit process aren't necessarily the staff today.
You feel that way?
So some of that gets lost.
You feel
Yeah.
that with staff turnover? That's you, not somebody else now.
But your point is.
I'd be interested in what things, not that we want to tell on ourselves, but what things this far in do we think are going to surface for this audit?
And no bank reconciliation, misapplied corrections, late applied corrections. Basically, everything the schools did no, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. But, I mean, looking at the school stuff, I think most of their stuff would be corrected. I think we're going to find some of these same things,
Flagged in other areas?
yeah, in a different department. I'd have to follow up on the Parks and Rec one, and the animal control. I don't know if they've corrected that or not. I know Gerald's office corrected that. And let's hope and pray we're not late this year. But I'll be spending a lot of weekends here now until December 15th, I'm sure. Started last weekend.
I have one other question, and I ask of the schools. For starting back in, I believe, January or February of this year, the schools brought in 2 outside people to work with the financial department before you arrived. Was that productive? Very
Yes.
much so?
Absolutely. We got a budget put together. With a lot more confidence than I think in years past. Absolutely.
So that was a good move.
So these balances.
One of the gentlemen who worked here before for the schools, right?
Yep, Mr. Steve Jenkins. He was actually at the schools when I was here at the county. And then,
Would he agree to help again?
yes,
Well, no, I guess the other question
We've worked together for years, so.
is that we've identified a area that needs some focus. I'll be kind. Not the schools, okay? There's another area that needs focus. You brought in a couple people from the outside to help. You got a new person in this job. Is that possibly a remedy?
Well, for, on the,
Different situation.
I would say, could it be a remedy? 100%. Can the Board of Supervisors pull that trigger? No. Could this committee even recommend it? You could, but there's no enforcement arm that can force that to be done because it is
And I
a totally
offered-
separate elected position by the citizens.
And you can't help anybody unless they acknowledge they want the help or need
Or
it.
you can't take a drink of water for the horse?
no, and I offered our temp.
The
person
National
too.
Guard.
The other thing
I
is,
think
you know,
they're busy,
when you fire the 4 people that know how to do the job,
Yep.
I mean, what did you expect, really? And then you want to ask them after the fact if they'll come back and help you. Now that when you walked in the door firing them, that's what we're working with, you know. I mean,
When
now
a
you want my
s-
help?
Yeah, when a system crashes, all the tentacles affecting that system have seemed to have been impacted by it. So it's one of those things that I think someone said it earlier. You know, a crash is coming, but all you can do is sit
Well,
and watch.
the reason I'm bringing up this point is, and I specifically asked about the 2 people that were brought in. The financial department still existed and was still functional.
There was no
But under
CFO.
their tutelage. And they were able to come in and, I think, and as you had said, really put some things into place that needed to be reinforced and put in place.
It's totally different jobs, or you don't mean them in particular, you just mean somebody. Yeah, because
It's
they
not- yes.
wouldn't be able to do what's failing, help with what's failing, but,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But there might be someone
yeah, oh, there's plenty, someone.
Could be. It could be.
come in and assist.
I don't know that it's necessarily, this is just outside opinion looking in. I don't know that it's a lack of being able to find skilled persons that could do the job. Probably comes down, it's just my opinion as a citizen on that end looking in. It's probably more of a personality type thing than it is a skill deficit as far as employees in an area. So, and those are well beyond any of our controls. So it's frustrating, but that's kind of where that's at. Randy, you'd mentioned earlier tax revenue per 1 cent is $670. Is it 670,400 still, or just 670? Okay, 674. Okay, yeah, I figured you did that. Anything else on the ACFR? Or
Well, I will say that, you know, we've talked a lot of doom and gloom, but I'm still gonna do my utmost to make sure that everything is done correctly and on time. So, you know, it's not a done deal that this is all gonna blow up for this year's ACFR, other than I'm sure we'll have some findings or audit. Other than I'm sure we'll have some findings. And also just to say that this continues to be a struggle for things to be done properly. So I don't even know. Should we keep doing those things? What are we? I don't.
we'll have that conversation later.
Yeah, I think the difficulty is in the requirements for this constitutional office is somewhat vague. It's not very specific about exactly what duties, there's some very specific duties called out, but others are, probably every locality and state has a little bit different things that the treasurer's office or any office does.
Are there skills and experience requirements associated with it?
And the hard thing is,
50% plus 1 vote.
thinking about running for sheriff.
There's some things that if we allow her to fail are going to affect our citizens and our staff, vendors, you know, the people we write checks to. So it's been really hard for me to not stay on top of a lot of those things because I don't want that to be the case. At the same time, there's only so much I can do. So you should be hearing people say, I couldn't get my check cashed at the bank, or I didn't get the payment I was expecting.
We did have an instance just a couple weeks ago. Normally, we require employees to have direct deposit, but we had 4 new people that came on. They didn't get their direct deposit in on time. And this was the Friday of the fair. And we had 4 employees that were able to cash their check until Monday because of.
What was the reason?
There's a positive pay file that you have to send to the bank, and it didn't get sent.
So we used to have positive pay with payment, meaning it wasn't automatically rejected. But rightfully so, she turned it on to be 100% rejection. The problem with it being 100% rejection is if you're not staying on top of what you're supposed to do, then people get rejected. And so that's what I kind of find fault with is don't turn on 100% positive pay rejection if you're not going to make sure people are getting their payments.
So what did that do to the employee or employees? Pardon.
They weren't able to cash their check until Monday.
That makes me so sad. That's the first time I had heard about
That's
it.
the first time I'm.
And I know when I was the HR director at a nursing home group, that would have been a basis for employee assistance funds. You know, there are people that count on getting their money on a Friday to go to Dominion and pay their electrical bill over the weekend or whatever. I can't
My
imagine.
office fixed it the same day, so I didn't know that they didn't get paid until Monday, but.
I'm not blaming it on you.
No, I know. I
No,
just
but it
what
was
I
like
meant
right
was
at 5. So whether or not, and then that it got fixed because So and they said that the positive pay file would not really have gone in and been processed
in time
until Monday.
I know we've jumped into
That's what
a lot of weeds and
It has
stuff
to be done
today,
at 3
but
o'clock.
these weeds, as my dad told me growing up, the more you ignore weeds,
The more they spread.
the more they'll spread in the garden and take over the stuff that's supposed to be harvested. So, rightfully so, we've jumped into some weeds. Help me understand, it's a new term for me. What is a positive pay file? What does that mean? I just want to understand what that is.
So it's an electronic file that gets uploaded to the bank that you're writing the checks on.
Okay.
And it gives the check number, the dollar amount. Sometimes it has the person,
the payee.
the payee on it. But it's primarily making sure that the check number and the dollar amount match.
So that's not a fraudulently pay.
Right.
Somebody can't just go and write a check for $5,000 when it was a $50 check.
Because that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And it's,
Invisible ink or whatever. They
Right.
steam it off and change amounts on checks all the time. We'll
and
do
it's
that.
considered good cash control, and we've had it for years. But in situations where something happens, somebody's out sick, they've not ever had it as 100% rejection, and now it's 100% rejection regardless of whether it's on a payroll account, which we could change it to be the payroll account not have it or whatever the case may be. But I agree with the reasons for it, because let's say somebody did do fraud and we didn't have 100%. The county could be liable, which
Sure.
we have risk management insurance for that, great. So it is something that we should have in place, but if you're not doing your job and you don't have a handle on that, you should probably make sure staff are getting their paychecks.
But if they work for us, we know where to find them, right? They're filled out on a W-2. We have their address. They presumably want to do a good job for this county. I didn't know that you could, have a departure, if you will, from 100% negative, just for payroll. I mean, that's what I would suggest. That to me is a no-brainer. Again, these
For
are our
payroll, right?
yeah.
To take the 100% rejection off of the payroll.
Yeah, it's embarrassing. Again,
is
it makes me
embarrassing.
really sad. That's the only word I can think of for it.
And that was right the Friday of the fair,
Mm-hmm.
somewhere around that.
It was
Yeah.
that Friday.
Okay.
I think
You were out of the office.
Okay.
But I did hear about it and got it corrected, but it sounds like even getting it corrected, if I remember correctly, if that positive pay file is not done by 3 o'clock, they can't fix it till the next day, so that must be why they couldn't do it
They
till
could-
Monday.
Yeah.
Is it fixed now? Like, is there somebody that, we have that problem this Friday? Could we potentially?
We could potentially if the positive pay files weren't being done correctly, but
How often is that done? I mean, like,
every time
Every
checks are
2
written,
weeks?
every time a check register's done?
we send a
Okay.
positive pay file.
Because it's also with accounts payable checks too.
And they have been, I don't know if it's been fixed, but I know that they've been doing it regularly through the treasurer's office since that day. We coordinated with one of her staff members, and she's been doing it. Is she always there, and then somebody else is supposed to take over, and they don't? Possibly.
Well, people take off on Fridays. Again,
Lots of people take off on Fridays.
we
yeah.
should really
It should be
try
one
hard
person,
to make sure
yeah.
that our people
It
get
should be
paid.
one person of point
Especially
of
in that
failure.
Right.
office, you've got to have cross-training. And
Well, single point failure for that could be catastrophic to people, so. It's, okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. Anything else from, okay.
I'm exhausted.
That's all right. We appreciate your help.
That was wonderful.
Very good job. Let's talk next steps just real quick. We just mentioned some things at the treasurer's office. I actually, and I'm sure now that we've discussed some things that may be a little odd, maybe awkward, but I would like for this audit committee to issue an invitation for the treasurer to come and have a conversation.
Why, and why shouldn't we generate a list of questions we would like the treasurer to discuss so they can prepare in advance and come professionally?
that's where I would start.
Point well
When
taken.
you start.
Okay?
Not just come and talk, but
Questions?
What we want, yeah.
Okay. What would be a good way to, not instead of just opening up a brainstorm here, perhaps sending questions to me from each member, and then we can compile the list?
You can always send them to the secretary and
Well, let's do that. If
he
you'll
can
send,
always confuse and mess them up.
Let's
Ms.
do
Wells
this.
has the most accurate list of questions. Everything that I know that I would send
Mhm.
to the secretary, like SPDA audit, positive paycheck, cash handling procedures, transactions, corrections, all those things I've just learned from her. So
Mhm. Any other questions? Just let's coordinate through Secretary Ball and Ms. Wells, and then we can just go from there. And they can send the list back through the county administrator to the audit committee for a final review before it's sent to the treasurer. Yes, sir.
If they would send them to the secretary, not Secretary Mrs. Wells.
Pardon me. Okay, yes, sir. Thank you. So send questions
Only one.
singularly to the secretary, Secretary Ball. Then he will compile them, and then
Right.
does
Sorry,
Secretary Ball
sorry.
have his email address yet?
that was my next question to the county administrator.
Okay.
Okay, does every committee,
Mr. Bryce, do you have yours yet? Have you activated yours yet?
I haven't activated that. Are we supposed to do it, are we supposed to have a county site we can sign into the county now? or-
Yeah, I
Through
sent all
Outlook.
three of y'all, I sent all three of y'all your address, you have a temporary password on there. So,
I got your emails last week and I didn't have a computer.
okay.
I'll go back and.
Go back and look at it, because regarding all, it went to your personal email address, but it showed you how to go and activate your new county email address.
I'll go back to it. I'm still reviewing all of last year's
Yeah.
emails, so about 170 of them.
all right,
I think that's a good idea. I also think we said that next meeting, just as we're looking at agenda, next steps, we would bring back the model cash handling procedures process.
yeah, that's another part of it.
And then we would follow up on
And
ACFR activities.
The other thing is, I think it would be a very interesting conversation if the treasurer, as we've discussed, your staffing needs and company staffing needs and where they think they're so short, that if we give the treasurer the the opportunity to discuss further.
And is this a topic we want to have, we want to hear at the next meeting? Okay, so the due date to member Bob then is a couple weeks, a week?
A week.
Yeah.
I think a week is sufficient. I don't mean any disrespect, but I believe everyone on this committee is chosen because you are intelligent and should be able to critically think enough to get it done in a week.
Dick, I worry about Dick and his computer.
He's been out of town.
I gotta tell you, but the thing's moving so slow, I had to pedal it this morning.
It's one of those. You got that AOL dial up.
When they tell you your computer is old and it's moving slower than you are, you think about getting a new one.
I got Starlink finally. So
You what?
I got Starlink finally. Connect to the internet all the time.
Just an observation for the committee, I took the time to start going through this book, and I'd like to doff my cap to the people who put this together, very comprehensive. Stephanie's group.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
There's a
I
lot.
had some tabs where I had some questions, but the questions were eventually answered as I kept reading, so self-learning was helpful.
Great.
It's,
You're probably the first person that ever read it besides me.
Dick made me read it.
I tell you,
They probably
Did he
will.
make you read?
Something very back, the statistical information, it shows you like 10-year trends of things, that's really good. to look at.
Yeah.
Randy said, see, I read it.
Which, let me do a discussion we can have in a future date is, are there leading indicator metrics we should think about as a governmental unit? Because we don't want to be in defense here, we always want to be in offense. But our leading indicator metrics, and I always use the metric of my neighbor who runs the cotton gin, and he says, we're always looking at measurements of rainfall in May and June to figure out how much staff we have to hire in September to run the gin. So, are there things like that that affect revenues and expenditures that, and I'm just throwing that out, it's something that we want to think about going forward, is what are those things that we can be anticipating? Because all these are really trailing metrics, most of them.
I really like that statement, and I had written a note that we should consider goals and projects. You know, I think we had some kind of guiding points that were presented to the supervisors, but we should definitely develop some goals and projects so that we can benchmark and measure against that. You know, one of the areas that I've been into recently is the comp plan, for example, and there is a section in the comp plan about finance. I starred it because we're doing our 5-year review right now. County shall maintain financial stability and sufficient financial capacity for present and future needs. Fairly broad. But there are 4 action items under that section, 2 of which at the 5-year mark have X's, which mean no progress. One has a green arrow, and one has a green check. Green arrow means substantial compliance, green check means done. But I think we should review those things. I mean, if we were saying that our comprehensive plan is our strategic plan, for lack of a better
What are the 4?
term. Do we have time? You okay if I read them?
Sure.
So, develop a more formal, this has an X, develop a more formal monitoring system to ensure that the county's public investment decisions are consistent with adopted plans.
We don't have a good adopted plan, first of all.
That's under the treasurer.
That's what I was just whispering.
That was
It
my
goes
second.
towards the-
second.
I think
That
public
would fall
investment
under that.
decision would be that capital plan.
Yeah.
Public investment decisions are consistent with adopted plans. So, at the very least, for the
So
5-year
vague.
review, we should
Yeah.
Not be vague.
clarify and not be vague, right?
Yeah.
Because to me, when I read that, I wasn't thinking CIP.
Right.
I was thinking public investment decisions. I was thinking
We should
Invest-
probably say
financial
infrastructure investments, so that it's clear that it's a capital, because infrastructure could be buildings, roads, schools.
it,
So
it
maybe-
doesn't say that. But
I'm just saying it, maybe it should.
yeah, but wasn't that one of the reasons that other counties have formed audit committees?
Hmm.
Was to advise on investment?
They would look at it, yes, that would be a part of it, was presented to
Decisions?
them by the treasurers.
The audit committee only kicks in if the investments that the treasurer is making is less than there's a standard, I don't know what the, I don't have it in front of me, but it stays with the treasurer unless the investments aren't yielding the kind of standard. The audit committee doesn't get to pick the investments unless the treasurer's investments aren't up to snuff.
Are they?
Yeah, because we have ours in pooled investments,
So-
yeah.
Okay, well, at the very least, that one needs some
Well,
wordsmithing.
at the very least, it'd be good to have an idea of what those investments are and those yields for,
They are in the,
They're in the
I
book.
can pull it up in the act.
Number 2, utilize a capital impact analysis model
past.
for
but
new
like current.
development so that the county may adequately assess the costs that new development will impose on public facilities.
We're
We
going
do
to-
that.
It's check.
Good job,
We
good
concur.
job.
Number 3, develop a system to monitor the balance of residential and non-residential development for tax-based purposes. Develop a system to monitor the balance of residential and non-residential development for tax-based purposes.
I think Gerald,
I'm trying to get it.
I think Gerald does a lot of that part when he presents to us the estimations of what our revenue projections are on.
My other thought on that is the extension of the Tischler-Bice study that's happening. Where they're going to go through and say at X percentage of growth, you need this and so of services and different things. So we may make some progress this year on that with partnering.
If I can remember right, when we were working on that was more in the context of how do we diversify our tax base? And then we were looking at it in that context. Because we are so heavy in residential dependence as opposed to further diversification.
That's what it sounded like to me. So, for example, let's say you've got, in the DSD, you've got some undeveloped land, and how much of that could be residential or non-residential as far as the comp plan? Because the comp plan looks at what's the best use for this particular land, not necessarily what it's being used for right that moment.
Could
That's a very speculative
Okay.
Right.
thing.
use some work. And then number 4 has a green arrow. Regularly review and renegotiate intergovernmental agreements where advisable to ensure adequate provisions are in place to safeguard the financial well-being of the county, such as utility agreements or revenue sharing agreements.
We're doing that.
Green arrow. Sounds like we're doing it. So anyway, those are the 4 things in the comp plan that apply to finance.
Good.
Chair, if I could just
Sure.
one thing. One thing that we've talked about vacancies, and this is something that Michelle Clark, our HR director, and I've been talking about, is that, everybody's having the same issue with finance people. There's just not enough of them out there. And one of the things that Michelle's has researched, Radford University actually has a required public accounting portion of their accounting degree now. A lot of schools just get general accounting degrees, but they don't have any public finance. And so Radford actually has, I don't know how much it is, but there are some courses. And she's been trying to contact the dean up there and say, can we come up there and just talk to some prospective students to see if any of them would like to, come down and just talk to us, to see if they have any that are maybe have some concentrations in public finance. But there's a critical shortage nationwide of accounting people in general, and specifically public finance.
Well, I made a note that I think we should consider some internships.
That's what
I
was
mean,
just
I have
thinking
2
about.
college students right now, and every college student is looking for some kind of summer internship.
Well, we did
Yeah, we've
reach
reached out.
out this past year, of June, I think, May, June, maybe even earlier, maybe it was April. Got a couple of applicants, but then nobody was interested in coming for the interviews.
Yeah,
So-
we're trying to work with the actual schools, like the deans or, the administrative staff of the schools to try to push that because we're not getting a whole lot of traction in terms of,
I've reached out to Paul DeCamp. I've tried to be unique in my thought process too.
I still pay tuition at Radford, so I'll give that person a
Yeah.
call.
Yeah, right? Who else?
Okay.
I mean,
we've talked to ODU,
Yeah,
we've talked
ODU.
to some of the universities in the area. And we actually went to people that, like Michelle knew personally, I knew personally, made the contacts. Oh yeah, we'll send you some information, and crickets. So
Yeah,
it's been a
They
challenge.
clowned the interviews. There, one person wanted $70,000. She just graduated with an accounting degree and wanted to be an accountant right out of college. So instead, I emailed her and I said, "Would you be interested in an internship instead? Because we can't offer you a job like that right out of college at $70,000 a year." No response. So I mean,
Yeah, and we talked about some of the unrealistic expectations of students, and so
but I was glad to give her the experience if she wanted to try an internship, a temporary. Nothing.
Interesting things. I know Secretary Ball had a presentation. I don't know that we'll necessarily get to it today, but what I would like to do, I've looked at it. I think it would be a good thing for us to look at in the future to model some of our discussions and how we evaluate. Do you just want to give a quick summary about it? I'd like to add it to our next agenda so at least there's time to process and digest that.
Yeah, very simply, I have a skill set in cognitive modeling, which means we sort of talk to each other, identify interfaces, risk issues. You can turn that into a model. You can put data in it. You can run things against it to see what are priorities, what are outcomes. It's a very simple level. I can do that. And the cost is free.
That's always a good cost.
Yeah, right. It takes time, but if there's something that kind of process, it's called FCM, fuzzy cognitive modeling. Fuzzy means there's no absolute value. You get to play with it. That's the whole idea of modeling. You get to play with things. So if there's some little thing you want to model across a system, I'm delighted to work with you to produce that. Software's free, and it's.
Can we model how best to work with treasurer's office?
Yeah.
If you can get me in the door, the answer is yes, I could model that.
Okay.
I think that will go hand in hand in some of the things that we're talking about identifying as far as some of the core things that we want to look at moving forward. I think that'll help us. So if you wouldn't mind a presentation on our next
Yeah,
meeting.
I'll put something simple together. Yes, sir.
Very good. Any other questions, thoughts for today?
The only other thing that's weighing on my mind is that at the end of the month, we'll be meeting to go over what the supervisors think will be a good strategic plan, having not revised it for several years.
Mm-hmm.
And I know we've been using the comprehensive plan kind of in its stead, but, any thoughts that this committee has that you could provide to us before October 25th to make it a good exercise I would appreciate.
Yep,
Be
very
helpful.
good. It would be. Add that to your list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Very good.
When we run out of things to do, I've started a financial plan too. We can go over that.
Run out of things to do.
Yeah, as an audit committee.
I understand.
Things to look at.
Because there's so many details that we're digging through now. I did want to point out I'm not really sure who Walter M. McCarty is. Chairman of the Board of Supervisors. I don't know who that was. So I think that's a material finding against Robinson, Farmer, and Cox.
I'm not surprised.
Anyway, not
Wow,
sure who that was.
Walter. I don't know.
Yeah, I've never been called Walter
I
before.
feel
That's
like we corrected that before we got
that
here.
is a
That's
trip.
not a signed one, is it?
if you
No,
read the
doesn't have us.
newspaper, our auditing firm is Robertson, Palmer and Cox. Not
Oh,
Robinson,
no.
Palmer.
That's ironic, because you're always called
I know,
Robinson
I
instead
know.
of Robertson.
Mr. Grice has called you Mr. Robinson all the time. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that out loud. Did I say that out loud?
His email's even wrong, poor Donna.
Okay. Anything else from anyone? All right, seeing none, we are adjourned. Give me 1 second.
That was very nice.